Hello and welcome to the Kodemaster Connection. I want to talk with you today about what is an inner child. What is the inner child? Have you heard of an inner child before? People talk about it. What is an inner child? And why is it important to know about it? I'm also going to cover a few things on how it plays out in our lives and what we can do to correct this, because it is something that we want to be aware of. And so we're going to dive into that today. So, an inner child. The inner child is essentially when we are young and we are children. At some point, we are made wrong for being a child. Maybe we're not allowed to be a child. Perhaps we judge ourselves for being childlike. It's not cool to be a child. At some point, we started repressing our own childlike nature. And with that comes a whole slew of feelings and a part of ourselves, essentially, that gets stuck in its development. So let's say that we start disconnecting from our child at 8 years old. What can happen then is that as this person grows into their maturity as a body, let's say they're 30 years old physically now, they still have the developmental capacity and emotional intelligence of an 8-year-old child. And what that looks like is it can look like when something bad happens and they don't get their way, how do they maturely, responsibly handle it? What happens to them on the inside? And so this is one way that the inner child can play out. And so the reason it's so important is because in order to acknowledge or know what age our inner child is at, it's really important because a lot of this has to do with humility and being able to humbly acknowledge where it is that we are actually at in our development currently. And the reason that's so important is because if we cannot identify and acknowledge where we're currently at right now, when it comes to self-responsibility, responsibility to others, all of that, if we cannot humbly acknowledge where we're actually at right now, then we're not gonna be able to correctly identify what the next step is for us that's actually right for us to take. That is gonna work. It's like, if you're on step B, but you think you're on step D, you're gonna try to go from D to E. So you're actually going from B to E. And that's just not gonna work because you think that you're a lot further along than where you actually are. And so you're trying to do these different strategies and going about your life a certain way where you're trying to go about it in a way that's just not possible from where you actually are. And if we have disconnected from this part of ourselves, if we have disconnected from our inner child, then we actually do think that we have no idea that this is actually going on inside of us, subconsciously speaking. Right? So we're completely unconscious to the fact that we have these emotions and this whole other part of us that's been disconnected from. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. All it means is that we've repressed those feelings underneath our conscious awareness. So just to catch up here. So for example, have you ever had a dysfunctional relationship? And if you have, what was the level of maturity in that relationship? Did it feel very mature to you? Were there, some barbs that were just being, stuck back and forth? What does that look like? And that is an example of the way that an inner child can run our relationships. If we have not brought awareness to this part of ourselves, then chances are there's a lot of other things that this part of us is running as well, such as balancing our checkbooks, blowing our money. Here's another issue is if we have, let's say, a 40-year-old man, physically speaking, that has an 8-year-old inner child. He's going to expect for his life to look like what society says a 40-year-old man should have. So maybe that means having his own home, purchased, bought, paid for, no debt. Maybe that means having a family, being able to provide for a family. Maybe that means owning his own business. He should be independent. He shouldn't have to work for somebody else. But if he has the discipline of an 8-year-old child, you can see where this is going to land. He's going to get hard on himself, potentially. He might even still be living with his parents at 40 years old. And he doesn't understand why. And so he attempts to make these goals to get his life in order. But the way that he goes about strategizing these next steps don't come from a place that is truly acknowledging where he's actually at. Because his body tells him that he's 40, he should be able to be this far along. So those are a couple examples. And then another really great example of our inner child is sabotage. Sabotaging our great momentum. So good momentum, if you can think of the last time that you had some really great momentum going for you. And everything seems to be great until it's not. And, it's interesting when these sorts of things happen, because when we get to that mode where we think everything's going along great, what happens? Well, what can happen is we forget that we have some inner child dynamics running. We forget that there's this whole other part of us subconsciously that is still there, that is just waiting for it to be known, make itself known, waiting, it's not waiting, but just, there's this whole other part of us that is just, potentially waiting to get activated, right? All it takes is somebody to say something, and the next thing you know, your good momentum's off the ball and chain. So, a lot of that it comes back to humility. It comes back to, where am I really at? And even though things are going great, I'm not going to drop my guard, because I remember where I'm at. I know what's really going on. And I'm not going to think that I've conquered, that it's all over, that I've solved my issues overnight, or within a couple days of having some good momentum and thinking, oh, my life's going to be completely changed now, because that's just not how it works. So that's one example of what it can look like when we haven't raised our inner child, when we've disconnected from our inner child, and then it comes back online. And to think, what does this look like when we forget that this dynamic, or this part of us, this inner child, is inside of us? What happens? Well, you can see how the cycle would begin, where you judge yourself. Maybe you're on good momentum, you sabotage, something happens, and then you're not able to move forward. And next thing you know, you're judging yourself for a decision that you made, or you're blaming someone else for the situation that you're in, the circumstance that you got yourself in, the situation that you co-created. So if we're not aware of this inner child part of us that's creating on our behalf without our conscious awareness, then what's going to happen is one of two things. Chances are we're going to either judge ourselves, or we're going to blame someone else. And both of those does not leave us in an empowered state to actually make a difference for ourselves, or get ourselves out of the situation that we just co-created. And so that's a big price, because what happens if we judge ourselves or we blame someone else? Guess what we're doing? We're setting ourselves up for what's about to happen next. And what's that? The same exact thing is going to happen over and over and over again because we're missing the mark. We don't understand what's going on. And so we're making ourselves wrong and we're making someone else wrong, when in reality, it's been us all along. So again, as to why this is important is because it's not a matter of whether you believe in this or not. This exists. This is existing regardless. And just because, let's say, we disconnected from our inner child when we were 10 years old, doesn't mean that we don't have those feelings. It doesn't mean that that part of us is now all of a sudden gone because we don't want it to be there, or we refuse to acknowledge it, or we just bury it. All that means is that that part of us has been suppressed, and at times deeply suppressed. And so the way that we can go about creating a viable solution for this is that we start finding a modality, we find a tool, we find a process, a system, or some help that allows us to go into our own subconscious so that we can begin making contact with this part of us that has been repressed underneath our conscious awareness. Because all of this is happening, it's just we're unconscious to it. So what we have to do is it's basically lurking in our subconscious, just under our conscious awareness. So we're not aware of it. So what we need to do is be able to go inside our own subconscious, make contact with this part of ourselves, and then start to create that relationship again, bridge that connection. And in doing so, we'll be able to find out what it is that this part of us genuinely needs so that we can move our lives forward, so that we can create the next viable step, the right strategy that's right for us, not where we think we ought to be or who we think or where we think we're really at. But this is the right next step that's actually true and correct for where we actually are. And yes, this can be a painful process of learning and acknowledging and humbly admitting who it is, what it is that we have to deal with, what it is that we have to clean up for ourselves in our lives, where it is that we are actually at in relation to where we want to be in our lives. So I have a couple of questions, and the questions are, and I want you to comment. I want you to comment and your answers. Number one, what would it be like if you had more discipline? Number two, what would it be like if you could support yourself in your own business? You had the discipline to carry out and create and sustain a thriving business for yourself so that you didn't have to work at a job that you felt was not 100% authentic to you. What would that be like? What would it be like if you had thriving and mature relationships with no dysfunction in them, with no abuse? What would your relationship to your money be like if you had more discipline? Or maybe if you had more fun, you could be on two sides of the spectrum. What would it be like if you had more discipline or had more fun with your money? Maybe if you don't have discipline, you tend to blow your money. Or maybe you don't have enough fun with your money at all and you tend to hoard it and save it and you don't experience life. So what would it be like if you had more discipline or had more fun with your money? Whichever one appeals to you. And lastly, how calm do you think you would be if something didn't go your way. So if something doesn't go your way, how calm are you on the inside? These are some really great gauges as to, discover on where you think you might be at emotionally speaking. Because again, if we're going to make routines and these other strategies and ways about life on what we want to do and where we think we ought to be versus taking the steps to actually get to know where it is that we're actually at, we're going to set ourselves up for a big vicious cycle. So these are just a few of the reasons on why you might want to learn about the inner child, more specifically your inner child, the level of development that it's at. What you can do is you can go to my website, thekodemaster.com. You can go to Dale Holloway tab and look at Dale Holloway's meditations. This is my mentor, my teacher, and you can go there to buy one of those inner child meditations. He also has some courses online that you can go to. I think that this next seminar that's coming up is called Power of Achievement, and it is about getting things done productively versus being busy and not really getting a lot of things done. And I think a lot of this is definitely going to have to do with our relationship to our inner child. Lastly, I'll give you a small testimony. And the testimony is me and my relationship with my inner child. I'll make this really brief and quick here for you, but before I met Dale, I was in a network marketing business for 5 years. And I kept having this vision of what it would be like to have financial freedom and location freedom and all of these beautiful dream-like qualities that every network marketing business paints. And I believe in that. I believe in it. I also took it hook, line, and sinker. And what I mean by that is I wouldn't stop. I did not give up. And on one level, it was good, but on the second level, it wasn't, because I wasn't going about it with the right strategy. I didn't want to settle for a mediocre transitionary job. I thought, well, I had a lot of pride. And I said, well, if I'm not doing what I absolutely 100% believe in, I don't want to work at all. And so for a long time, I went back and forth between jobs, getting a job, not having a job, working for companies that I didn't want to work for, promoting products that I didn't want to promote because I didn't believe in them. Meanwhile, I had a product from my network marketing company that I believed in wholeheartedly. So I constantly felt like there was this conflict of interest. And so meanwhile, I didn't actually, what was happening was I was pretty much homeless. I was borderline homeless. My mom kicked me out, when I was younger, and I didn't really have another place to go. I found a few friends to stay with. I wasn't on the streets. I wasn't sleeping in my car, but the situation at hand was saying, Cody, you need to make some money. You need to really get your life together and start getting some income underneath your belt so that you can have your own place and so that you can choose who you want to live with if you want to go that route, or live by yourself if that's the best option. And, I was just so stuck on 50 million steps ahead of me because I wasn't willing to acknowledge where I was really at. And meanwhile, I kept judging myself because I was trying to do things like go business to business with this product. And, it was just too much pressure for me for where I was at. And I was never able to be consistent with anything. And I was like, but I know I can do this. I know I can do this. And yet there was this whole part of me, this other part of me that couldn't, that basically it was too much. And I was never able to hold any consistency with it. So finally, after a few years of doing this, of basically, barely making ends meet, not really having any consistency in my life, and chasing this wild dream of fantasy. And now this is a much more extreme version of what not being connected to your inner child can do. Because if you think who it is that you really are, and you have all this experience and you have all this knowledge, and yet for some reason you're not able to get it out. It's just for some reason the world doesn't know about you yet with that book that you want to write, or whatever it is that's really in your heart that you want to give out to the world. If you feel like that's happening for you, like where you have this gift, or you have something that you know that you can contribute, or you have a wonderful product that you can promote, but you're just not getting the results, but you know that you can do it, but the results aren't, then there's that disconnect. There's a disconnect going on. And so learn how to do this. Learn how to connect to your inner child. And if you need help, schedule a free consultation from me on my website at thekodemaster.com. Get the inner child meditation underneath the Dale Holloway tab and start getting yourself involved in this higher educational knowledge, and get yourself accustomed to these new teachings, these higher teachings that are going to empower you. That is all for today. I hope that you really enjoyed this. I hope that you got a lot out of this on what is an inner child, how it plays out, and why it is that we need to correct it, and how to correct it. I'll catch you next time. Kodemaster out.